Hello and welcome to Hotseat, an exciting collaboration between Sky News and First News, the UK's national newspaper for young people. Now, Hotseat sees some of the country's most powerful men and women questioned by young people about the issues that really matter to them. Now, we've already had a Chancellor stall on his Times tables. We're very pleased today to have the Secretary of State for Education, Nicky Morgan, next in the seat. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, here's who you're going to face today, the Hot Seat panel. They've been drawn from First News readers and from Stand Up Be Counted, Sky News campaign to get young people engaged in politics. We have Theo McLaurin, Olivier Lode, James Lloyd Elliott, Leon Remfrey and Chloe Miller. Now, before they get started, let's get Mrs Morgan to introduce herself and explain just what is it that makes you so important to our lives.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I'm Secretary of State for Education and also Minister for Women and Equalities. And also I have a third job title, which is Member of Parliament for the Loughborough constituency in the East Midlands. So I look after schools, I look after making sure that our girls and young women are having high aspirations and that people can treat it equally. And I also represent the people of Loughborough here in Westminster.
And are you feeling nervous?
I am, because when I go to my schools, they always ask me the most direct questions. So I'm looking forward to some great questioning.
Great. Well, let's get going then. First up, Theo.
I'm in Year 9 in the Form 9-6 at Hampstead, and my year is going to be the first year to take part in these exams. And what will it mean for us? If it's harder for us to get top grades, what steps are being taken to ensure employers know about the changes?
Well, firstly, look, it's not about making the exams necessarily harder in the sense of making it harder for people to get top grades. It's about making sure that the exams that you take really are valued by universities, if that's what you choose to go and do, and ultimately to employers. So you're absolutely right that we need, and government will be leading on this and working with schools and others to explain to employers what the new exam grades are going to mean. Just to say, from my personal experience, I was the first year to do GCSEs. So it's not all bad, and actually with a new exam system, it is about making sure that our exams are as rigorous and as possible, because we know that you're all going to have to compete, not just with people here in England and the UK, but also with people who are going to be going after jobs from all over the world. So we need everybody to have confidence that we are teaching and examining in a way that shows that our young people are the best, because I think they are the best.
Well, Mrs Morgan was perhaps nervous when GCSEs came in. Theo, what are your concerns about these exams?
I'm more concerned for the earlier years that have done GCSEs, and my year will have a higher grade boundary that they can hope to achieve. But does that put the years that have done GCSEs before us at a disadvantage?
Well, I don't think so. And at the end of the day, often what happens is, you know, GCSEs obviously are important, and then you go on to do A-levels, and then it maybe go on to do something else, either at college or at university. And so that's what employers were looking for. It's overall, I think, the achievements of a young person that's sitting in front of them in a job interview. And we have confidence. We have obviously made the GCSEs more rigorous, but we have confidence in the current GCSE system. But we just know that we want, as I say, an even more rigorous system, that all things have been, we've worked them out. So basically all the exams fit together, so we're obviously reforming GCSEs and then A-levels too. OK,
thank you. Olivia, what's your question?
Is it fair that I have to go to a specialist dyslexic school, which is expensive for my parents because I didn't get the help I needed at 2 state schools? Can you make it possible for all teachers to have better training and special needs so they can identify and help children who struggle?
Well, look, I entirely agree with you. And look, for some people, obviously going to a special school is going to be the right thing. And I've got a fantastic special school called Ashmount in my constituency, and they do just amazing work. But you're absolutely right. It's about making sure that every student gets the right advice at the right time. And funny enough, I was talking about this morning with a man called Sir Andrew Carter, who has done a review of teacher training in this country. And we were just talking about the fact that we want all teachers who are going to be trained to have more experience of special educational needs. We've also made some changes as well. One of my ministers in the department, called Edward Timpson, has been looking at how we best support students with special educational needs and how we make sure that the school system and the health system, for example, are working better together. And so that we are identifying problems earlier, because you're absolutely right. What we want is any issues to be identified and pupils to be supported. So things like the changes we made as well about the way that reading is taught is also making a difference too. But you know, that's where we want to be eventually. It'll take a little while to get there, but we are determined that people get the right support.
OK, thank you. Now, Mrs Morgan, as I was saying, Sky News has launched a campaign to help young people get involved in politics. Stand up, be counted. And the next question is from one of our stand-ups, Minanda.
Michael Gove, who was the previous Education Secretary, wasn't very popular with schools. Will you be carrying on with any of his policies and why?
A good political question for you.
Well, yeah, look, Michael was a hugely reforming Secretary of State. And if you're going to make lots of changes in a system, that's obviously going to bring challenges. And we've touched on some of the reasons why the changes, so for example, to exam standards were so important. I want every child and every student to have the opportunity to go to a good and outstanding local school. And I think that's what students and families want too. So we're going to carry on with the reforms made. Higher quality exam system, higher qualified teachers, academies of free schools where heads get more autonomy. But I also need, obviously, to work with the teaching profession. And I think, actually, sometimes politicians don't explain why we're making the changes. And so part of my task over the next few months is going to be explaining why we've made the change made and what they actually mean to people's lives.
And do you hope that that'll hit on the point she said there, make you more popular?
Well, if you go in as a politician for a popularity contest, you're normally found that doesn't quite work. As I say, it's for people to make their own minds up, and the teachers and those working in schools and people, locally students. But I think actually by explaining, by going out, by doing obviously things like this, but also I do a lot of going around the country, to visiting schools, talking to teachers. It's so important to go and actually to listen, and that's a message that comes back. And again, actually we just want to tell you what our views are and how these things are working for us in this school.
So a listening Education Secretary. Well, hopefully you'll listen to our panel. Let's go back. Leon, you're next.
Yes, if the government won't take steps to protect libraries, how will you ensure children learn to love books and won't just see them as compulsory and boring, like homework?
Well, that's a very good question. And I absolutely do want young people to make sure that they love reading. And I've been supporting Save the Children have launched a fantastic literacy campaign because we want to make sure that all young people leave primary school able to read and also, as you say, to enjoy reading. Now, local councils have a statutory duty, that means a duty in law, to provide library lending services. And fun enough, before I came here, I was actually talking to the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, which is the department in government that looks after libraries, about the issue I thought you were going to be raising, which was this one. And there's an independent report coming out shortly on how important libraries are. There's no doubt, look, we've been through a very difficult time with the economy in this country. There's less money around. And also, I think people expect more from their libraries now. So again, I see locally libraries that don't just lend out books, but they have cafes, they have events going on, they have job clubs, they offer computers so that people can learn computer skills as well. And I think that's the way to go. But you're absolutely right. The love of reading is critical. I want people to really enjoy reading, not, as you say, just to feel they have to do it because basically someone's telling them they have to.
And this is an issue, Leon, that you've campaigned on. What did you think of that answer?
I don't actually think you've answered the question. Is the government actually going to take steps, or are they not?
Well, as I say, we are taking steps because we are reminding local councils that it is their duty to provide libraries, which are obviously where people can borrow books for free, which is the critical thing. And as Education Secretary, I want there to be libraries in schools. But sometimes, actually, politicians can't just say yes or no. We have to work with particularly local councils, local councillors in the local area, because we need them. And it's right that they do provide the services that are right for their local area. So I think you come from Cornwall. So obviously providing service in Cornwall could be very different from providing services in the middle of a city, for example, like London.
Well, we did promise you some tough questions.
That's fine.
Let's move on to James.
Britain is one of the few European countries where it is still lawful for children to be hit. The European Court ruled 3 years ago that UK had failed to protect a boy who was hit by his stepfather. Parents or even babysitters can hit a child as long as it's not a permanent mark. Don't you think that this is shameful? Shouldn't violence against children be banned altogether?
Good question.
Well, it's a very good question. And, I agree in the sense of violence against children, absolutely. And I think there is a difference, as your question hinted at, which was the difference between, obviously, violence, which is completely unacceptable, and assaults or anything like that, where a child absolutely deserves to be protected. And we invest a huge amount in this country in what we call safeguarding, which is about keeping our children and vulnerable people safe. But there is also, an area where we don't want to criminalise parents, and there's what we have called reasonable chastisement, which is a long word for saying that if it was a a sort of sharp tap, or sometimes there is a need for a mild smack, which, as you say, doesn't leave a mark, then actually I don't want to criminalise parents if that's the decision that they take to discipline their child. But you know what? I have to say, most parents, me included, talking to friends who are parents, very, very rarely do that. And anything more serious than that is illegal and should be stopped by the police and should be reported to what we call social services, which are run by the local councils.
I would like to say, how do you draw that line? But James, have you got any other worries that you'd like to raise?
Well, like I think sometimes it's quite hard to find out when it's actually happened. Like the other day I was watching TV and I saw this horrible like charity. It was a nice charity, but it was like how babies had been thrown down the stairs and everything. But then like sometimes they just hide the babies away, and how sometimes you wouldn't know, and how you should sometimes just express that to the people.
Well, you know, it's a really, really good issue, and actually it's one of the big things in this country. There has been some terrible cases where children have been abused and sadly have been killed even by their own parents. And so we have a balance to strike. We absolutely have to protect vulnerable young people and you know, babies, children, everything else. And we rely on teachers, doctors, and people who help out perhaps at a Sunday school or something like that to report in concerns. And as I say, we have social services, we have people called social workers who make decisions about whether children should stay with their families or whether in fact they should be taken away. And sometimes obviously children then adopted by other families. It's a very difficult decision to take, but I think those kinds of cases you're talking about are violence, they're assault, and they absolutely must be cracked down on the law. I think, Anushka, your point is right, that sometimes it is a difficult line. And as a parent, certainly I have a 6-year-old son, and you have to make a decision sometimes about whether they're being naughty, or whether there's another way to discipline them. And there are all sorts of books that are written about parenting and everything else. You know, I always say children don't come with a guidebook, and actually it's tough sometimes making that decision as parents, but there is a line, and I think that most parents will know. And as I say, violence is unacceptable.
I mean, what do you think reasonable chastisement is, just quickly?
Well, I don't know whether it is just a tap on the hand or a mild smack on the bottom, but the point is actually, again, it's not for... There is and I think politicians, we struggle with this all the time, which is that when does government make a decision, and when do we step in, or when do we allow parents, obviously, or carers to make that decision? And it's very difficult. You'll hear sometimes people talk about the nanny state, and actually we don't want to be telling people how to bring up their children or how to be parents, but there has to be a line where we say, no, that is a line that you have crossed, and that is a child that now needs support from other people.
Thank you. Chloe?
Parents have a choice about which school best suits their child. I believe Ofsted are trying to make all schools the same. Therefore, schools lose their individuality. What do you think?
Well, I wouldn't agree with you, because actually I do think, I mean, Ofsted, there has to be a framework by which schools are inspected. And actually today is quite a good day to talk about it, because the Chief Inspector of Schools has been talking about how we're doing and how many good and outstanding schools we've got and how many where we still need further action. And I think actually we have obviously the academies and free schools and local authority schools, and actually that's all a name basically for schools where the money comes from government, but we leave it to heads and to teachers to run them. But we also have things called university technical colleges, where you can do more perhaps hands-on technical education. We have studio schools as well. And then obviously we have independent schools where people will pay fees, and we have grammar schools as well. So I think we've got a really diverse system. And we have some schools, I was at school last week up in the north, where they're an art school, and they were doing a fantastic performance of We Will Rock You. And they took that really, really seriously. So I think actually what Ofsted will look at is the kind of the core curriculum. Our schools are teaching what we call a broad and balanced curriculum. But actually what we want to see is innovation excellence, and there's lots of different ways the heads can do that and teachers can do that.
OK, thank you. Now, we've had an incredible response to our appeals for questions, so we've tried to fit in as many as we can. Here are a few video selfies sent in from all around the country.
Will you reintroduce the old grammar school system, and if not, why?
Do you agree with Michael Gove's proposals for extended school days?
I've just started at your old school, Surbiton High. My question is, are pupils under more pressure now than they were when you were at school? And is this a good thing or a bad thing?
So 3 good questions.
Wow. OK, so grammar schools, Look, we have a position in law where existing grammar schools can expand and they can put in an application. It's quite a laid down criteria that I have to make a decision on. But actually I want all schools, as I said before, to be good local schools, offering that outstanding education. And I think that's what we are aiming for as a government, rather than reinventing or having more grammar schools. Well, no, I don't think so, because I think that, I would say, there's a current application in which I will judge on its merits and on legal advice for an extension, but I want all schools to be good schools offering excellence in education and really stretching their pupils.
OK, and the extended school days?
Extended school day. Well, I do think, actually lots of schools already do breakfast clubs, which is very important, and obviously helps if your parents are working and you're able to get to school earlier, and also after school clubs, so it could be support with homework, it could be extracurricular things, cadets or Duke of Edinburgh or all kinds of sports, and that actually. So I think in terms of what I'm not saying is we're going to have a longer day, we're going to get people in classrooms earlier and we're going to finish them and they're going to stay in classrooms much longer. But I do think that actually making best use of school premises, and actually for some students actually the extracurricular things they do after school is really important. So it's something that people talk about a lot and that I'm very interested in pursuing. But what that doesn't mean is, as I say, students being in classrooms longer or teachers having to teach for longer.
And a nice question there from someone who went to your school. A lot of parents must feel this, that their kids are under a great deal of pressure these days.
Well, I'm quite interested to hear what the panel here think, but actually, I think that in terms of exam pressure, and I think every year probably feels pressurised, and there is more pressure, I think, these days in terms of the career options that are open and the subject options. It's a much bigger world than probably. And when I was at the school, we didn't have the internet, for example, we didn't have mobile phones, and I think those kinds of things actually bring pressures as well. We're seeing online brings its opportunities, but also its pressures, things like bullying online and that sort of thing. And I think that does bring pressure to growing up today.
Do you guys agree? Do you feel more pressure these days?
Yeah.
Yeah, what sort of things?
Like, in the SATs, you always feel in school. So I know we just started, our SATs are only in May, but we even did like mock ones in year 5 to the ends of year 5. And it can feel a bit useless, especially now you don't actually get a grade by the end of it. You're just told what marks you have, or if you're below or above average. And I feel that we should maybe get that, because we've just done all that work, and to not know where we are feels a bit bad.
Okay.
Just taking it on board?
Yeah.
All right. Theo, next question.
How are students that aren't capable of concentrating for long periods of time being catered for in the new shift to old-style exams?
Well, actually, it sort of slightly builds on the point we've just had, actually, because we are changing the exams so that they are what we call linear, which basically means they're examined, particularly GCSE A-levels, at the end of the 2-year period. And we think that means that students can learn about things in depth, and they can have a greater understanding of the subject. And also, they're not constantly being assessed, because if you're constantly preparing for the next test or the next exam, actually, that's quite stressful too. But there are exemptions to that. So if a student really there's a real reason why actually that would be very difficult for them, it could be a special educational need, it could be something else, then actually there are exemptions to that, or there are allowances for extra time in exams or extra different ways of taking the exams. But I do think that actually having that time, that 2 years to really get under a subject, to understand it, is very important.
Great. Olivia, your second question.
Arts and creativity play a big part in early years of primary school, but seems less important as you progress in school. Why?
Well, I'm not sure that's the case, because I mean things like music and drama and art actually are taught into secondary schools as well. I suspect that actually sometimes maybe, and I do think that the arts are very, very important. And I think one of the things I've been trying to talk about as Education Secretary is about people keeping their subject options open for longer. So, for example, actually doing sciences and maths, but also doing an arts subject is very, very important. Allows broader career options when you're thinking about jobs at the end of the day. I suspect that sometimes maybe people make a decision that actually that they don't enjoy a particular subject, or they might not have the time for it. But again, I'm very keen that schools individually advise students as to what is right for them, and that students, particularly girls, who we don't see doing enough science and maths subjects, make the right decisions for them, not on the basis of what other people are telling them or what they think other friends are doing.
OK, thank you. Let's get another question from Vinanda, our stand-up.
Since 2012, 350 youth clubs have been shut down. This is mainly because of the £60 million worth of cuts which have been made to the youth service. Now, considering the amount of time and effort that youth workers put into helping young people, not only with managing home life, but with managing the demands of school, do you think that such cuts were wise?
Well, look, I think questions like that stem from the fact that we have had, as I say, a very difficult economic situation in this country. The size of our economy shrank by 7%, which is a big recession. And that means we've had to make some very difficult decisions, and there's less money around for many different things. And so local councils, who often will run the youth services, have had to make difficult decisions. And often that might mean making a change in terms of opening hours or the availability of the youth service, or perhaps not being there at all, sadly, and working with other youth services. But I think youth services are very, very important. But I also think that schools, there's a role for schools in terms of supporting young people and offering, as I say, things like extracurricular activities, but also support for people's mental health and well-being as well, and confidence building.
So you think they should do some of the role that perhaps the youth service has done?
I think the best schools probably already do that, and I think the issue is going to be finding the right students who are going to most benefit from youth services. Many youth services still exist, and so what I don't want is the message that they've all gone, because they haven't. But we have, there's no doubt about it, had to make some difficult decisions.
OK, thank you. Let's come back to our panel. Chloe.
Despite the fact you have never worked in the education sector and you had private schooling, what qualifies you to be the Secretary of the State for Education?
Well, two things really. First, obviously, I'm a parent of a child in the system, so I very much have a viewpoint from that. I have members of my family who have been teachers, and my husband is a governor of a number of different schools and a college. But also, I think as a minister, you're there to challenge the system. So you're not there necessarily to be the expert, having worked in the system, but you're there to care about it and to ask the questions and to say, well, why are we doing it that way? And so actually, when the Prime Minister asked me to do it, it was very much about listening to teachers up and down the country, and to parents and to students. And actually, I don't think you need to have worked in a system necessarily to be able to do that and be a good representative. Otherwise, we'd have a very narrow number of people who were MPs and councillors and representatives.
Do you think you need to be a parent?
Well, I think it certainly helps. I don't look at things from the parent perspective. It's not essential, of course it's not. But again, a lot of this job, whether it's an MP or minister, it's all about listening and taking on board people's concerns.
What do you think of that answer, Chloe?
I don't really agree but surely any teacher who maybe's parents was a teacher, they could just give the same excuse as you. I mean, obviously, if you've worked in the education sector, maybe as a head teacher, or maybe you helped run a few schools, or if you were just helping the school run itself, surely you'd have a better insight over to what happened. And you went to a private school, which shows I know I'm personally sitting for private schools, and I know the education there is very different to a state school. So surely you can't really say that.
Well, no, because I think actually, as I say, members of Parliament and ministers are there to be representatives. We're there to listen and to respond to concerns. And actually, I think what you want is people of all different experiences. So there's people in the Department of Education who have worked, no doubt, in schools and in colleges, but there's also people who haven't, but they come in from outside and they bring their expertise in. And so, as I say, I think that as the Secretary of State for Education, you're there to challenge the system and to say, why are we doing it this way? And you bring your own experiences of life into that system. And again, as Member of Parliament, I was a Member of Parliament for 4.5 years before I became Secretary of State. I went around all the local schools in my area, talking to teachers and students, and I have a pretty good understanding, I think, of the concerns, some of the concerns, not all of them, because there's always different things that they have, and that's what I bring to the job.
OK, great. James?
What plans do you have to make sure state schools have better access to outdoor playing space and better sport fields?
Well, one of the things we've done as a government is introduce something called the Sport Premium, which is basically for primary schools in particular to allow them to bring in people from outside who are sports experts, might be teachers. I know that in my local area, for example, we've got these sports apprentices who go in and inspire schools. There are statutory requirements, those laid down in law about space and how much space children have to play in. So we think that sport is very important. And one of the other things I've done as Secretary of State is talk about academic standards are very important, but so too is having a sort of what we call the well-rounded young person. So all the other skills you're going to pick up at school, things like persistence and grit and self-confidence, and sport is very much a part of that, and that's what we've said to schools. And I think the schools do prioritise sport. They realise the characteristics it builds up in our young people.
What do you think, James?
Well, another point, what do you think about Michael Gove who sold off 20 big playing fields of state schools.
Well, sometimes that's the schools actually have asked, and there's a reason for that. They wanted to convert them into other things. And at the end of the day, one of the things we want to see in our school system is more schools running themselves. That's what we call an autonomous system. And so heads and teachers and governors making those decisions for themselves. So that is a decision that is taken locally. The Secretary of State does have to approve it. I haven't had anyone asking if I will approve that yet. But you look at every case on its merits, and you make a decision on that basis.
OK, how's your maths?
Oh, I'm not doing maths on air.
Oh, I think Leon's got to ask his question.
Yeah, what's the cube root of 125?
As I say, I think it's probably better that politicians don't do maths or spelling on air.
You've been talking to colleagues in the cabinet. Go on,
I'm afraid
what's the answer?
I've got to press that question, actually. Do you know what the answer of 125
As I say,
is?
I'm not going to... I don't think it's very wise for politicians to do either maths or spelling on air.
Well, we'll let you off, seeing as half the office couldn't answer it too. Can you give us the answer, Leon?
5. Also, I have another one, which is... What is the cube root of 1,728 minus 11?
If you can get that.
Well, I think that's one I might just have to go away and work out. I think, as I say, I think politicians who answer maths questions or spelling questions on air normally come a cropper.
Let's go back to the video for 3 more questions.
Why do children have to have homework?
Did David Cameron pick you to be the Secretary of State for Education?
Now I'd like to ask you, do you think iPads are a good idea in school?
Very good questions. Well, homework is decided upon by schools. I do think homework is important, but it's got to be set in the right way, obviously, and the right amount of homework, because what I don't want is children getting stressed by the amount of homework they have. It did occur to me that, of course, as a minister, you get homework, because I get what's called a red box every night. And so I have to take home several hours' worth of work after I've finished to do it. So if you think as a minister or as an MP you're going to escape homework or bells, because, of course, we also have the bells in the House of Commons as well, so it's a bit like being back at school. But as I say, I think homework is very valuable. I think it gives students an opportunity to explain to parents as well what they're doing. And it also allows us a bit of a discipline, I think, in terms of studying and getting things done and being organised. So the second question was...
Why were you picked so
why was I
quickly
picked? Well,
into your time as an MP?
You have to ask the Prime Minister that.
Did you ask him?
No, I didn't ask him. I didn't think that was a wise question to ask. Are you sure, Prime Minister? I just said, yes, thank you very much. That's very exciting, partly for the reasons I say, which was I was interested in education and always have been, and also as a parent, I feel very passionate about it. I think that hopefully I've shown over the course of 4 years of being in Parliament that I do listen and I do pick up on issues, things like mental health, which I'm passionate about, careers, which I've been talking about today in the House of Commons, which I'm able then to take that experience into to education.
And the last question there, iPads?
Yeah, I do think iPads definitely have their use. I think computing, coding, IT, it's absolutely critical. It goes back to the point I was talking about today about science and maths, about wanting all our young people to be the most prepared for life in modern Britain. And that's
you don't think they're too obsessed with their screens?
Well, I think that you've got to be used in the right way. But I think most young people these days have access to a computer or an iPad or somewhere. And so again, I think things like teaching coding, seeing it in schools, seeing them use iPads is it's very important.
And let's give the final question to Vananda.
Are there any unannounced major education reforms that we should expect from the current government before the general elections?
Any exclusives for us?
Well, I haven't got exclusives, but you are the first broadcast interview that I've done since I made the announcement about careers today. And that's all about getting more schools and businesses, employers to be linked up, about inspiring young people about all the different opportunities that are out there. As I say, I'm going to be explaining about our reforms over the next few months. And we've already announced some things we want to be, will be in our manifesto about making sure that any schools that are in difficulties get the right support early on. So yeah, but the next week, I think the next few months are just going to absolutely disappear. We've got 150 days till the next general election, so it's going to go very quickly.
Fantastic. I'd really like to thank Nicky Morgan for being with us today, but especially like to thank our excellent panel. And the really big question now is, who do you want next in the hot seat?